Today we are joined by Kate Amber, Rod and Linda Dubrow-Marshall, and Jennifer French Tomasic. Rod Dubrow-Marshall is a professor and psychologist who co-created and is co-program leader for the MSc Psychology of Coercive Control program at the University of Salford in the UK. Rod has been researching the psychology of coercive and undue influence, including in cults and extremist groups and in relationships and families, for over 20 years, and developed the evidence-based totalistic identity theory to explain and tackle the psychological effects of coercion and ideological extremism. Rod is a member of the board of directors of the International Cultic Studies Association and is chair of the ICSA Research Committee and Network, and is co-editor of the International Journal of Coercion, Abuse, and Manipulation, or IJCAM. In 2006, he was awarded the Herbert L. Rosedale Award jointly with Dr. Paul Martin for their psychological research on undue influence. He offers private consultations with families and individuals affected by coercive control and is an exit worker and psychologist with the Re-Entry Therapy Information and Referral Network, or RETURN, in the UK, which he co-founded in 2004 with Dr. Linda Dubrow-Marshall. Linda Dubrow-Marshall is the chair of the Mental Health Committee for ICSA and a member of the ICSA Research Network. She is a co-founder of the Re-Entry Therapy Information and Referral Network, or RETURN UK, a private practice that provides services to individuals and families who have been affected by cultic influence and abusive relationships. Linda co-developed and co-leads the MSc Psychology of Coercive Control program at the University of Salford in the UK. She is registered with the Health and Care Professions Council in the United Kingdom as both a clinical and counselling psychologist, and she is an accredited counsellor and psychotherapist with the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. She is a licensed psychologist in Pennsylvania, USA, and a registered psychologist with the National Register of Health Service Psychologists in the USA. Dr. Dubrow-Marshall is a consultant in clinical hypnosis with an advanced certification with the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis and is certified by the Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing Institute. She is certified as a Master Addiction Counselor with the National Certification Commission for Addiction Professionals. Kate Amber, founder and visionary at End Coercive Control USA, or ICSA, is a beacon of change in the landscapes of domestic abuse and coercive control. As an international speaker, consultant, researcher, and expert witness, she harnesses her personal experience and academic expertise to educate and revolutionize systems, restoring dignity and freedom to survivors. With a master's degree in the psychology of coercive control from the University of Salford and advanced certifications in violence and abuse prevention from the University of Pennsylvania and child protection from the Institute on Violence, Abuse, and Trauma, she merges lived experience with a strong academic foundation. Her groundbreaking research, including the quicksand model of coercive control, has won her acclaim, notably the 2024 Domestic Violence Training Program of the Year Award from DomesticShelters.org. A survivor herself, Jennifer French is a cult and religious recovery specialist. She offers group and individual services both within the U.S. and internationally. Jennifer holds a master's in the psychology of coercive control and is currently getting her PhD in forensic victimology. She's trauma-trained and a Level 2 internal family systems practitioner. Jennifer hosts the Project Hope podcast for families and friends with loved ones in a group of high control or high demand. She's a member of the International Cultic Studies Awareness Research Committee and has conducted research on those who self-identify as having experienced coercive control and received internal family systems therapy as a result. Jennifer is also an expert witness in coercive control court cases. She lives in Los Angeles, California, with her husband and extended family. Thank you for joining us, and welcome Kate, Rod, Linda, and Jennifer.
Welcome, everyone, to this panel discussion for the ICSA conference. We're recording this. This will be an online presentation, also presented, I believe, live in Montreal. So hello, everyone in Montreal, and hello, everyone watching this across the world, we hope. Our panel today is about how to create respectful conversations in an increasingly polarized world. And in particular, what we've learned from working with current and former members of cults and victims of coercive control. And we're going to be drawing on a range of different work that's been done including, of course, within the ICSA network in terms of exit work, but lots more besides. So let's just say a quick hello from each of our panelists. I'm Rod Dubrow-Marshall. I'm the co-program leader of the MSc Psychology of Coercive Control program at the University of Salford in the UK, the only distance learning program of its kind. I'm also on the ICSA Board of Directors and share the ICSA Research Network, and I co-edit the International Journal of Coercion, Abuse and Manipulation, published by ICSA. And with Linda, as well as the MSc program, we run the Return UK. Over to you, Linda.
I'm Linda Dubrow-Marshall. As Rod said, I'm co-program leader at the University of Salford of the MSc Psychology Coercive Control program. And I also work in private practice with Rod with Return UK, which we'll tell you about in a minute. And professionally, I'm a clinical and counseling psychologist. Kate?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Amber. I am the founder and chief visionary officer of End Coercive Control USA. I am a graduate of the program that Rod and Linda run, and I am also the creator of the quicksand model.
Hi, everyone. Jennifer, and glad to be with you all today. I work with survivors and families, having a consulting service, and then I also work as an expert witness in the courts around topics of coercive control. And I'm currently in a PhD program for forensic psychology.
Thank you, Kate, Jennifer, Linda. So we just wanted to briefly say that part of what inspires us to be talking today about coercive control across all the different contexts in which it occurs is the master's program that Linda and I created back in 2017. We've been a fully online distance learning program since September 2020, and we're the only master's program anywhere in the world that examines how coercive control works psychologically in relationships, families, but also in extremist groups and cults, in radicalization, violent extremist groups, trafficking, gangs, and also workplaces. And we have a practical focus both on prevention, exit, and rehabilitation. And we'll be particularly looking at those last two factors when we think about how to broker respectful conversations and move on the agenda from the polarized positions that we find the world in increasingly in this epoch. So we're inspired every year by the students that join us from different professions, from different backgrounds across the world, and who go on to make amazing contributions in the field, including, of course, Kate and Jennifer, who we're proud to say are both alumni from our program.
Thank you, Rod. And we're just returning briefly to our private practice. Return stands for Re-Entry Therapy Information and Referral Network, which is a specialist mental health private practice to help individuals and families who've been coercively controlled in cults and in other environments. And we look to enhance self-efficacy for people and to restore their autonomy. I started this in the U.S. with my colleagues Steve Eichel and Roberta Eisenberg, and have been doing this for over 20 years now in the U.K. with Rod. So, how it feels when someone has new views or even old views that are completely opposite to yours. So you seem very far apart, you're not communicating, and it may seem that the person with the different views is completely convinced that they're right, correct, maybe spiritually true or absolute truth. They've got the special knowledge, and it could be that they underwent a sudden conversion to this position, and that the person you knew before and cared about is gone or unrecognizable. Now, the opposing sides want to each rescue the other side. That's a paradox. And each feels that they know what's best for the other person. No, I know what's best for me. I know what's best for you. I don't know how to get the other person to see my point of view because I'm so convinced that I'm right. I need to convince them. I need to rescue them. How it probably is If you really listen carefully, you may find there are points within the opposing views that you can understand. The polarization may not be as extreme as it seems. We have learned from people who exit cults that there were moments when they had doubts. So we call this Discover What's Possible, moving beyond those polarized views.
So what we know, we'll touch on this more, is the more that you push back and tell people that they're wrong, the more those doubts seem to disappear. So we're going to be exploring ways in which to hopefully let those doubts come to the surface. And we wanted to present, in looking at how beliefs are polarized, research on how ideology becomes polarized within a particular frame, within a particular ideology. And you can do this with religion, you can do it with politics, you can do it with philosophy, to do with business, etc. And this was from research around far left political groups in the UK, where on the top line, you have the normal left to right frame of reference, with communists on the far left, socialists on the center left, conservatives on the center right, and fascists on the far right. And then you actually have the frame of reference that existed in the far left political groups or cults that I was a member of, where it was distorted such that you can see on the left of the continuum that there were a whole concentration of different groups that to people that weren't on the far left would all look pretty much the same, but actually for those of us involved were extremely different, and the differences were really, really important to us. But notice importantly how the Labour Party, or even the left of the Labour Party, such as the now former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, for example, would be seen to actually be a centrist, even maybe on the centre right of politics, and see how the right is all distorted and truncated together on the right of the continuum. So based on belief systems, you can actually view both yourself in a position usually of purity as being at one extreme with very magnified differences with others in that part of the continuum compared to the rest of the continuum. And this perception actually seems real. It's as real as anything else is real in terms of how you perceive the ideology and people day to day. So let's fast forward from that period through today, and in particular here in the United States, where we may be witnessing probably the most polarized position that we've had for a generation or more in terms of political positions. And what we wanted to present using a similar approach was the position from the polarized right and the position from the polarized left. So first of all, from the polarized right, and I'm not talking here about people that take a centrist view or a center left or center right view. I'm talking about people specifically who have got a polarized position on the right. And you can see here that they will place the Democrats, of course, way over on the far left, basically no different from communists, as you'll see on the diagram below. But then interestingly, that this frame of reference may actually see the fellow travelers with the Democrats these days, people like Liz Cheney, as being also fairly far over on the left. And Mitch McConnell there, used to be seen as very much on the right, now kind of seen as being much more in the center. DeSantis being a bit closer to the position of the polarized right. And that's where I've placed a highlight over the current president, representing that polarized position where others are seen as being in a different place on the continuum as a consequence of that, or the people that identify with his politics or with the MAGA movement. You can see how the fascists are still seen to be to the right of that, because of course MAGA supporters and Trump supporters would not categorize themselves in that way. This is the polarized position from the right. The polarized position from the left, and here I'm taking this polarized position to be people to the left of the Democratic National Committee and the mainstream Democratic Party, in particular perhaps socialists, people that might be in the Democratic Socialists of America, again, they wouldn't see themselves as being at the far extreme of the pole. That would be where the communists would be, or the Trotskyists. The Greens might be a little to the right of them, but see where they would put the DNC. The DNC would very much be on the centre or even the centre right, and very close to Mitch McConnell and Liz Cheney make a reappearance as being very much bedfellows with the Democratic National Committee. But notice also how they would categorize in their frame of reference the Trump supporters as being over on the far right alongside the fascists. So you can immediately see from the vantage point then of the highlighted piece in yellow how this gives a very different, distorted frame of reference compared to the other position. But it's real to the people that see it this way. And the next slide illustrates, though, despite the fact that there's quite a lot of difference in the positioning, so on the polarized right position, Cheney and McConnell are seen as being on the left, relatively speaking, whereas in the polarized left, they're still seen as being fairly far on the right. The Democrats are on the left, actually, but on the one on the polarized right, but not the same, of course, in the polarized left, where it's seen as being more in the center. But what these circles indicate, of course, is that there could be, under the surface, like Linda said earlier, a little more commonality than first meets the eye. In particular, of course, the fact that in both the polarized right and polarized left position, Trump is, and the Trump supporters, more importantly, are actually quite close together on that continuum. And likewise, the Democratic Socialists, many of whom actually operate within the Democratic Party, are actually not that far away from the Democrats. So what you actually see is that there is some common ground to say, well, actually, the Democrats and the Socialists and the Democratic Socialists from America are fairly far to the left. And the MAGA supporters, the Trump supporters, are fairly far to the right. Put in those terms, we can see that there would be a basis potentially for discussion such that that apparently very polarized position starts to break down, allowing for a understanding of some common ground as well as some fundamental misconceptions. And this is where we're now going to play a video by Ivan Humble, who was an active member of a far-right political movement in the UK called the English Defence League. This is a fascistic far-right organisation that is particularly focused on Islamophobic ideas and beliefs. It's a short clip about how Ivan came to the realisation that his polarised position was wrong. And let's hear Ivan talk about this.
I thought Muslims wanted to take over. They didn't like us. Islam was going to take us back to the Dark Ages, beating their wives. They wanted to introduce this Sharia law. It's like a battleground. You've got to be prepared to fight back. You do anything to protect your identity. I was shopping in Norwich with my children. I noticed there were a few Muslim women. They went into a room full of Muslims, all in their traditional clothing. As I was about to walk away, something just possessed me. It's like it took my hand and knocked on the window. This little Muslim man come outside, and I introduced myself as English Defence League, and he was fascinated. He said how much he's wanted to talk with somebody from there for ages, because we have got a few things mixed up. So we set a date to talk again. From then on, I think we had regular meetings every 2 weeks. It was just talking to somebody like myself, where I thought every Muslim was out to get me. It wasn't like that at all. Just a pocket of individuals who want to cause disharmony. The hardest thing for me was taking myself out of that bubble of hate and moving away from the negativity. For every negative story, there's 10 positives that you never see because they don't sell papers. So I opened up a little bit and then realised that the people I once feared aren't that bad.
Yeah, very moving, isn't it? Yeah, I agree. And how to get out of that bubble of hate is really the focus of this panel presentation today. It's the different approaches that we can take to help people exit those bubbles of hate, to come to the realization that they may have a lot more common ground than they think. There may be some misperceptions too, like Ivan said. There were things that they needed to talk over. But the importance of having that ongoing contact and seeing it as a process. The research has shown that if you bring people together that have conflicting views, it actually can make the polarization worse in the short term. So it has to be done very carefully, and it has to be seen as a process. And we see this as analogous to the parallel processes of disengagement and recovery and rehabilitation from extremist ideologies of all kinds that exit physically from an extremist group or cult may occur in time at a particular moment in time, but actually is continual process alongside that of recovery and rehabilitation. And actually, what's key to that is that process of de-radicalization and de-identification. And part of that is to actually come to an understanding of where those misconceptions about others may have come from, where people may have dehumanized the other, while also recognizing, of course, that it's still okay to have differing views. We don't all have to emerge from this process agreeing with each other about everything, but it's how you can respectfully disagree. So in other words, Ivan Humble didn't convert to Islam. The Muslim man that he was talking to didn't convert to whatever religion Ivan Humble is, or say that Islam was suddenly wrong. And indeed, it's that process of rehabilitation that allows for that depolarization to occur for everyone involved. At least that's what we hope, and that's what seems to be from the evidence in this area.
Now, about that person you don't recognize anymore. Keep in mind that people will change their views as they journey through life, and they may change again. And of course, it's possible that the person's been unduly influenced by coercively controlling people and groups, and their influence may not last forever. The person that you knew is still there, but their multiple identities and complex ways of critical thinking have been replaced for now with the dominant totalistic identity.
So we bring up this diagram of the theory of totalistic identity that I developed with Linda, but also through the research that we did at the Wellspring Retreat and Resource Center with Paul Martin, Ron Burks and colleagues, that indicated that extent of psychological distress following a cult experience or extremist group experience related significantly to extent of group identity, thus indicating that there's a group identity quality to that extremist experience. And then, in fact, the more that there is that totalistic type of identity, the worse those psychological features of distress, indicating that cults, as per Lifton, have an unhealthily dominant group identity. And if we move to slide 15, this has been mirrored in the work of Ari Kubvansky and also John Turner, in the way in which extreme identity has a personal quality, and that people see the world through that lens. It's real for them. As Turner wrote, the shared world is psychologically experienced as the real objective world, which is why it's really not very good to say to the person that you fundamentally disagree with that they're crazy. Because for them, it's absolutely real. In that sense, then, the underlying psychology of ideological attachment and that of conspiracy theories, to move to slide 16, relates to these existential issues of identity, who we are, what we believe, and any form of ideological purity and extremism, but conspiracy theories in particular provide those very clear answers. They give people that special knowledge. They feel they have that inside knowledge about the world. They allow people who have been, in a sense, victimized, who've been persecuted, who've lost their jobs perhaps, who see no hope, to suddenly feel powerful again because they have that unique and important knowledge. It's those vulnerabilities that we know cults and extremist groups exploit. Conspiracy theories, of course, are often very harmful in their behavioral attitude, racism, negative behavioral consequences around a disease, some really horrible conspiracy theories in the past around HIV/AIDS, etc. But again, remembering for the people that believe this seems really real to them. It makes sense to them. It makes them feel special. It has, in that sense, a personal significance to it. It's also the case, moving to slide 18, that people tend to overestimate the conspiracy beliefs of others. So in other words, when you hear something that feels really out of sync with your own belief system, we tend to make that category error, which is to think that it's actually worse than it really is, both superficially and because you're some way distant from it, which again is why it's really important to break down those barriers in terms of communication. And we'll come back to that later on. It's also the case, to move to slide 19, that belief in one particular conspiracy theory is strongly predictive of a belief in other theories. These tend to go together. So people that believe the 9/11 attacks were a conspiracy also tended to believe that Princess Diana was deliberately assassinated. So there can be a co-occurrence of those beliefs, which again can make it quite difficult initially to think, well, how on earth do I get between that to try to break down that belief system again? Telling people that they're wrong and crazy is the wrong thing to do. Exploring aspects of common ground and discrepancy is, as we would argue, the right thing to do. And that's where we would finally put conspiracy theory movements, of which we see a lot both on the far right and on the left, as being in the same block on slide 20 as the extremist group, that it can be totalizing for the person psychologically or potentially totalizing for them.
So, how do we understand the person's attachment to their perpetrator or group leader? So, we like the concept of trauma bonds or trauma coerced attachment to understand the loyalty that the person has. And an important thing is that they're being manipulated, and the people manipulating them are disrupting their old attachments, including family and friends. But a moment of encouragement is to consider that family and friends have genuine love and attachment for the person. It's not a pseudo intimacy or pretend caring. It's real, and that gives it a lot of power, and it's really difficult to disrupt that completely. So, trauma bonds or trauma coerced attachment has been noted across various abusive contexts, in intimate partner relationships, in trafficking, in cults, and it leads to people denying or minimizing the coercion and abuse. And we give credit to Deutschik and Raghavan for developing this concept, and to Christine Courtois for her seminal work on trauma bonding. So we want to develop a strategic approach to communicate with people that have different views from us. And you have to think about it. You have to plan it, and you have to be patient. And you have to prepare by looking at your own emotional responses and get support for that separately, so you can put it aside to have strategic communication. Easier said than done. That means when you're communicating with the person with whom you no longer agree, you let go of the anger, fury, exasperation, and disappointment. You're perfectly entitled to have those feelings, but it's not going to help with strategic communication. So you set it aside, and this often requires support and consultation with other people to develop the strategic approach. The next slide summarizes the approach we use in return, where we rely on motivational interviewing, and then we'll elaborate. So just as an overview.
Yeah. So this strategic communication approach uses some key aspects of motivational interviewing, or MI, that Linda's going to run through very shortly. And in particular, when having conversations with people with whom you disagree, or in situations where you know there's going to be that polarization, is in a sense to roll with that resistance, to not immediately or even in the short term assume that it's possible to break down that difference, but actually to explore that difference. And we'll have a look at what we can also learn from street epistemology in that regard later on. But the importance then of trying to build common ground through that communication. And in exit work, we use paradoxical intent to help develop the discrepancy, the idea that there may be a difference between the original beliefs that first attracted somebody to the ideology and the actual current beliefs and situation in which they find themselves. So to give an example, aren't the tariffs working really well for the economy? Aren't they creating more jobs? That's the intention. And then actually allowing people to think through whether they actually are having that effect on the economy or not. And in that sense, looking at the common ground, because of course everyone wants jobs to be created, right? Everyone wants their industries to succeed, provide some common ground on which to have a discussion. And what that means, of course, is that the two people can become for each other, just as the exit worker can be, or just as the family member can be in the work we do with families, a positive pole of attraction to the other. And in that sense, and we'll have a look at a historical example of this from the United Kingdom and Ireland later, how to overcome and avoid old or current disputes. So you almost are kind of moving beyond those disputes and creating new common ground. And in that sense, planning, like we do with families and people in extremist groups, the return. In fact, we named our consultancy around that because it was all about how can people return? And of course, it's different for people born and raised, but it's how do people emerge and recreate something that's different to when they're in the group or when they're trapped in that polarized position. So that planning, while the dissonance builds, and rolling with the dissonance, encouraging a dissonance, and the importance as well that when you're doing this, you take good care of yourself and get the necessary support, because this is really hard work, as we all know that are in the field, but it's really hard work talking with people across that polarized divide that now exists. So taking care of ourselves and taking it one step at a time is really important. That's where we really think the motivational interviewing, we can really learn from that as a technique.
So motivational interviewing was developed by Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick and others. There's an example of a book. It's being applied to healthcare situations to help people to stop drinking. It's also part of motivational enhancement therapy and can be used for bad habits as well as difficulty in thinking. So basically, it's respectful, like the title of our entire presentation today. So if you've ever tried to help someone change, you probably realize that if you just put yourself out as the expert, I know better, and you tell the person what to do, you need to stop smoking, you need to stop giving money to that cult, it usually leaves you frustrated. So this is an alternative approach to the confrontational approach, which used to be popular with alcoholism, putting someone in the hot seat, surrounding them by former addicts who tell them they're in denial, to moving toward harm reduction and other psychologically evidence-based ways of helping people to make changes. And so it's collaborative, it's person-centered, and it pays a lot of attention to people's ambivalence. So that's where those doubts that the people had in the beginning that we talked about, that there's always doubts while you're going through things. Those doubts were there, and we're trying to enhance the motivation to look at that. And so we try to motivate the person in ways that facilitate this change. And the best way to learn how to do this with other people is reflect on your own ambivalence. So you develop understanding and empathy, the things in your own life that you're ambivalent about. Everybody has them. So the principles of motivational interviewing are the importance of empathy, which we can express by listening carefully and reflecting back to people what we hear, helping to develop discrepancy between their goals and values and what actually is happening. So you're trying to be a great person, but you're stealing for your group, for example, avoiding argument and direct confrontation. And rather than opposing their resistance, adjusting what you say, having a good conversation with people, and always supporting self-efficacy and holding hope and optimism for that person that they can resolve their ambivalence and that things can get better for them. So that ambivalence is key because it motivates people to move in a better direction. And whereas direct argument tends to increase defensiveness and reduce the likelihood that they're going to change their attitudes or behaviors. So you want to really get in touch with the other person's intrinsic motivations and values, which are probably being violated in the undue influence that they're experiencing. And you're building that alliance that you understand where they're coming from because you really try to understand their point of view. So you're empathetic, supportive, but you're interacting and having a conversation. And you can direct that conversation when you hear the person expressing the ambivalence and using what we sometimes call change talk. You can reinforce that. So you're helping to provide the conditions that will lead to change. So that empathy is key, and that helps you to be a positive pole of attraction. Because as I said, the people that care about the person have more actual caring for them than the pseudo intimacy and caring that is promised in the relationship or group where they're being coercively controlled. Instead of getting into arguments, look for that common ground. Go along with the resistance, roll with it, listen carefully, listen underneath the surface to what makes them tick, what's attracting them. Try to increase confidence that they can change and that they have control. And note when you hear the discrepancies. So there's nothing wrong with this group. Everything is perfect. Well, not completely. That's what you're going for. You only give advice when people are looking for advice. By the way, that's good advice in general. And you remove barriers to change. You give people options. You show them alternatives. You provide choice. You decrease the desirability of the things that are not working in their favor. And you show them choices that are positive, that positive pole of attraction. You express that empathy, you give them feedback, you help the person to clarify their goals. So it's a very active kind of conversation, although it is paradoxically also person-centered, but it's an active approach. So it's a kind of conversation about change, and it's collaborative, but it is evocative. You want to go for feelings because feelings is what motivates people to change. You don't act like you're the expert and you know everything. You express that empathy, you support self-efficacy, you instill hope that things can be better, you build on previous successes, you highlight the positive aspects that the person already has. You roll with the resistance rather than challenging it. That resistance will be based on their own ambivalence. Don't push them into the polarized corner. Keep that hand out to them. Don't confront them, de-escalate, and avoid negative interactions or arguments. Don't challenge the statements that demonstrate resistance, especially early on. Disrupt any struggles. Just stop it. Avoid arguing. It's a dance rather than a fight. Let the person define their own problems and their own solutions and invite them to examine different points of view. Work always on developing that discrepancy, the mismatch between what they've been told about how wonderful everything will be and how things actually are. Help them to see where their values are not being expressed or being violated, and gradually help raise awareness of how current behaviors are leading them away from their goals. They're not really making that money in the multi-level marketing scheme. Increase their motivation and make important life changes. And the specific skills has been known as ORS. O, use open-ended questions that help the people to think. Create a forward momentum, not yes or no questions. The A in ORS is for affirmations. always and reinforce their strengths, build that rapport and understanding, help them to feel good about themselves. That's what they need to get out of an abusive situation. And you have to be congruent and genuine. So don't affirm them for things you don't believe in. So, for example, previous efforts, you've tried to leave before, you feel like you can never leave, but the fact that you left before shows you can do it. You stayed away 3 weeks the last time, just like you might tell an ex-smoker. And you reframe concerns as positive things that they have those concerns. The R in ORS is for reflections, which really feels good when people hear you reflecting back to them what you're hearing, that you're hearing their feelings as well. And those reflections guide the person towards change by focusing selectively on the negative aspects of things as they are and pointing out the positive aspects of making changes. And finally, the S is for summaries, doing a recap, communicating interest and understanding, calling attention to the important elements and shifting that direction to help them to move on, highlighting both sides of the ambivalence, but strategically making more of the positive attitude toward moving toward change. So these are some principles of reflective listening. And I think we'll move on to street epistemology now.
Thank you, Linda. And we consider that there's actually some degree of interesting commonality between the approaches of motivational interviewing and street epistemology. We welcome an active dialogue, actually, about practitioners in both of these areas. And street epistemology is a conversational technique that uses Socratic questioning that really encourages people to reflect on the quality of their reasoning and the evidence supporting their beliefs, as the slide says, to foster critical thinking and understanding, but without winning an argument. The aim is not to win an argument. SE does not aim to change someone's beliefs. Now, in a sense, that's the commonality with MI. Now, with MI, you are hoping to get the behavior change, at least in classical MI, in terms of health settings. But of course, if it comes across too much that actually that's what you're trying to do with regard to beliefs, then the wall is going to come down. The polarization is going to increase. Instead, use the conversation to show respect for the thought process, to get the person to enhance their thought process by listening to what their reasoning is, listening as to why they believe, what their struggles may be that have led them to this position. And it's the polar opposite, of course, to what people often feel is the case, which is the people who oppose them look down on them. The people that have different views to me are going to be thinking that I'm a bad person, that I'm a stupid person, that I've got these problems in my head, that I must be crazy somehow. And instead of that, it allows the person to examine in a very democratic way with each other the methods and evidence that they've used to get there in a way that's mutually respectful. And this is where we think the Socratic questioning at the heart of street epistemology is very similar to the approach in questioning that Linda was outlining from MI. And that idea that people will be condemned for the beliefs, of course, was expressed very well in the Brexit referendum campaign when Michael Gove, a leading Conservative politician, made the statement that people have had enough of experts telling everyone what they should believe. And of course, you can get those experts on both sides of the political divide that believe that they know what's right, because of course, that's the whole problem with polarization. You know what's right and everyone else is wrong. Whereas actually, to break down that polarization, we want to build the common ground. And so much of the time, it can seem like those concentric circles on the top left. You have to squint a little bit to see where that common ground actually is. It could actually be more the case that this is like an island that is emerging from the water, and there is enough common ground there to both people to sit on it, for perhaps some plants to grow, for maybe the island to expand. And that's hopefully what these approaches to exit work have taught us over the decades that if you work on it in these ways, you can make that island much bigger and make that overlap between the circles much larger. And of course, this has been done in real life. And I finish my part of the presentation by drawing everyone's attention back to the Northern Ireland peace process, where for decades, terrorist groups on both sides of the divide between Protestants and Catholics, Unionists and Republicans had been killing each other, bombing each other. This was something where the amount of blood that had been shed was massive, huge hurt, huge pain. And yet the people you see laughing and joking with each other, Ian Paisley, Martin McGuinness, were the leaders. Martin McGuinness was on this RAA Army Council, part of that terrorist group, went on to be a Sinn Féin politician. Ian Paisley, Reverend Ian Paisley, a very forthright supporter of the unionist cause, from polarized opposites with hatred in their hearts for the other side, despite the fact that they were both Christian men. Nevertheless, through a process that allowed them not to say, I agree with you, or that I forgive you, but by focusing on something else entirely, which was how can we stop the pain and the suffering in the future? How can we actually examine the common ground that we might have as two Christian men and actually see if we can do something with that? And through those principles of Socratic questioning, of spending time exploring that common ground, they were able to depolarize to an incredible extent in terms of their personal relationship. In that totalistic identity chart, they were almost able to transcend that block in the middle and see each other as people. Now, they didn't have to love each other, but they were able to sense something good about themselves on one level that didn't justify the pain of the past, but actually allow them to see that there was a different future that they could work together. And hence, they actually ended up being referred to by the people that worked with them as the Chuckle Brothers, the fact that they genuinely seemed to make each other laugh. And from the laughter, beyond the tears, came opportunities for real development of community cohesion. Now, is Northern Ireland a totally peaceful place? No, it's not. Have all those divisions disappeared? No, they haven't. But by and large, the Northern Ireland peace process has stayed strong and is a great example, actually, of where these principles we believe that we've learned from the exit work across the decades. Great colleagues in the field who developed and pioneered this work, like Giambalvo and others, that this can really be applied to the polarized position. If they could do it in Northern Ireland, then the argument is that we can do it now, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in other countries around the world.
That's so moving and inspirational. And just finally, a reminder to take care of yourselves. Families need to take care of themselves. It's vital for the success of strategic communication because it's so easy for hurt feelings, fatigue, burnout, resentments to build and to feel traumatized. So we do a lot of work with family members alongside and integrate with the exit work that we do. So thank you for letting us share our thoughts. And at this point, we'll turn over to Jennifer.
Thank you. All right. So the inspiration for my portion of this presentation comes from the deep impact that understanding the basics of trauma has had on my own personal journey. This led me to training as an integrative somatic trauma practitioner, and I've described my experience with somatic work as expanding me into feeling almost like I have a sixth sense, so really attuning within to receive information about what's happening for me, as well as tuning out from that space to sense what's happening around me. So I hope this is a useful lens for us to glance through, because I believe that understanding trauma leads to positive pathways out of patterns we find in unhealthy groups and relationships, while creating the foundation for compassion and curiosity that really turns that power dynamic into a dynamic of collaborative togetherness. So why do we need to be trauma-informed? Even if we succeed in dismantling systems of oppression, we will inevitably recreate them if we have not attended to and healed our collective trauma. Grounding ourselves in a trauma-informed framework can support a culture of healing in our organizations and collaborations. And justice really cannot happen without healing. And healing trauma as well as toxic stress can get in the way of this process. So a trauma-informed framework is not meant to pathologize trauma-impacted companies and individuals. Rather, it can shed light on ways that unaddressed trauma can get in the way of healing and can even contribute to the traumatization of people within our own communities. So at the heart of a trauma-informed approach is the call to center healing personally, interpersonally, and collectively. When in survival mode, we might feel as though we're constantly putting out fires and fighting for basic rights. This is one aspect of the trauma of injustice. It can block our capacity to dream and imagine. When we center healing, our work can become generative rather than just reactive. This allows us to respond to harm as well as envision the work toward the radical transformation of our systems. This is that little rock that Rod was speaking about that's ready to expand. So this requires us to be flexible and agile as we move from crisis and urgent matters into spaces where we can connect and envision long-term solutions to the problems we're facing. In order to heal from the traumas of injustice, we must understand the impact of trauma on our communities and movements so we can create a new narrative together. Unspoken and unaddressed trauma often gets normalized as part of a person's personality, or for collective trauma, it can get coded as culture. The healing process can help us transform the qualities and tendencies rooted in trauma and survival into more authentic and life-affirming traits that support us to move beyond survival and thrive. So how do we heal from trauma? What do we mean by healing? What are the signs we're healing? How do we create opportunities for healing while doing the often stressful, difficult, and demanding work of life? So part of the topics that Linda was addressing in terms of self-care, right? Healing. So understanding trauma and the impact of chronic and toxic stress can help us demystify the healing process so that we don't inadvertently get in our own way. Healing is about cultivating affirming relationships and creating the conditions in which everyone can survive and thrive inside the microcosm of our organizations, collaborations, and relationships. So healing is also about transforming our trauma and pain into opportunities for meaningful growth. It's about fostering resilient communities and organizations that can handle the messiness of this work, get good at apology and repair, and find ways to celebrate along the way. Ultimately, healing is relational, but it also requires that we each do our personal work. This includes reflecting on what life experiences have shaped us and how they impact who we are in the world and with each other. Inherently, trauma holds the opportunity for healing. When individuals are engaged in a process of authentic reflection to build self-awareness and accountability, they contribute toward the healing of their community. Self-awareness is a vital component of disrupting injustice. Without it, we are likely to replicate the harmful dynamics of dominant culture that cause violence, division, and inequality. Individual healing is not enough because fundamentally healing is also relational. It is about safety and belonging. Ultimately, we are social beings and need healthy, safe relationships in order to truly be well. So just because we've experienced trauma, it doesn't mean that we're broken. Trauma shapes us, sometimes in beautiful ways and sometimes in awful ways, often both. Certain experiences or circumstances can buffer us against the negative impacts of trauma and stress, and others can leave us more vulnerable and at risk. One way to think about the things that buffer us are resources. And resources can be personal, interpersonal, material, spiritual, and systemic. So let's get a little into the types of trauma. The first one we're going to look at here is shock trauma. At their core, traumatic events or circumstances overwhelm our capacity to cope and respond and leave us feeling helpless, hopeless, and out of control. Shock traumas are things that happen to us, like violence, rape, war, car accidents, natural disasters, witnessing violence, and even medical procedures. These can be singular events or chronic and repeated. They are terrorizing ruptures in our reality that challenge the foundation beneath us and can disrupt our ability to function. They can also expand our capacity and transform us in positive ways. Trauma is not the event, it is the response to the event. It is what stays with us long after the event is over. It has to do with our physiological response to threats and how our nervous system can hold on to or let go of that survival energy mobilized to deal with a traumatic event. When human animals encounter a threat, such as a tiger about to attack us, we instinctively mobilize to deal with it. We go into sympathetic arousal or a fight or flight state. In this state, our body secretes excitatory chemicals and hormones. Our heart rate goes up, breathing gets shallow, digestion goes down, and energy rushes to our extremities so we can fight off the threat or run away. If we successfully run away or fight, we utilize the energy that was mobilized and thus release it from our nervous system. In an ideal situation, we deal with the threat and are able to return to a resting state. We are able to move on and leave the event behind us. The event, as scary as it seemed, does not traumatize us because we were able to cope and respond. So what if we can't cope? What if we can't run or fight? Another response to a threat is the freeze response. Freeze is like having the accelerator and brakes pushed at the same time. We're flooded with stress energy, yet immobilized in the moment. Freeze is an adaptive response because sometimes if the predator doesn't see us or thinks we're dead, it leaves us untouched. Appeasement can also fall into this category. This is when we comply to minimize a potential threat. Some of you may know this as fawn response. In this case, whether we freeze, appease, or try to escape or fight, but are unsuccessful, we do not have the experience of being able to cope and respond. We're not able to utilize the energy that was mobilized to deal with the threat, and that energy stays stuck inside of us. The chemicals that get secreted when we experience a threat are meant to be a short-term strategy to keep us alive. When trauma is not resolved, it has a negative impact on our capacity to feel settled and safe. This can lead to trauma symptoms such as anxiety, hypervigilance, depression, or shutdown. It can look like insomnia, flashbacks, or always feeling like there's that tiger around the corner waiting for you. The survival response that was meant to be temporary can become constant. As the title of the best-selling book on trauma by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, indicates, we carry the imprints of our life experiences in our bodies, and they can keep us stuck in the past until we heal. Peter Levine, creator of somatic experiencing, found that animals in the wild have a way of discharging the energy that was mobilized to deal with a traumatic event that prevents them from being traumatized by predator attacks. Animals will shake and tremble after an encounter with a predator and release the energy and impulses that they weren't able to act on. Most humans have been socialized out of this response. We've been told by the dominant culture to get over it and move on, suck it up, don't complain, and get back to being productive. Some call this the trauma of capitalism. I think of it as a particular cult trauma, this high-functioning productivity. We've been told not to cry, scream, shake, or act wild. In many ways, we have civilized ourselves away from our innate capacity to heal from trauma. Most of our indigenous ancestors had healing rituals that included dancing, shaking, sounding, and other practices to release and express their trauma, grief, rage, and even joy. For numerous reasons, many of us don't follow our body's natural instinct to release trauma. Instead, we tend to suppress and hold on to it, which has an impact on our well-being. Another category of trauma is developmental. It's not caused by a discrete event or events, but rather it's relational. Developmental trauma is caused by an ongoing misattunement between a child and their primary caregiver. Human babies rely on their caregivers to survive. If the caregiver is not attuned and responsive to the child's needs, both physically and emotionally, the child will feel overwhelmed and thus helpless and hopeless in the world. Emotional abuse, neglect, and severe inconsistency in behavior can all be very traumatic to infants and young children. We are relational beings, and our attachments with our caregivers leave a lifelong imprint on us that affect all our future relationships, for better or worse. When we are ignored or unseen as children, it has a dramatic impact on our capacity to feel safe, connected, and embodied. If we were not able to develop secure attachments with our caregivers, it can be hard to develop healthy, secure attachments as adults. People with developmental trauma tend to be more anxious or avoidant in their relationships. Some people have very poor boundaries and are more vulnerable to abuse and manipulation. Others have overly strong boundaries and isolate or become abusive themselves. Ultimately, developmental trauma can make it difficult to have healthy, balanced relationships and can impede our sense of connection and belonging. Stephen Porges, who created polyvagal theory, says that trauma compromises our ability to engage with others by replacing patterns of connection with patterns of protection. Porges's research has validated what many already know. One of the biggest ways that unhealed trauma impacts us is in our capacity to feel safe with others. We all need to feel safe, included, and valued. For people with a history of developmental trauma, this can feel impossible. We heal developmental trauma inside of relationships where all parties are committed to disrupting unhealthy habits and nurturing healthy ones. So let's talk about systemic trauma. A final major category of trauma is systemic, which refers to violence, inequality, and oppression that is perpetrated, sanctioned, and upheld on structural and institutional levels. These systems include education, healthcare, what I like to refer to as the criminal legal system, politics, finance, and public policy. These systems favor certain individuals and communities and exclude, disregard, or even harm others, often based on their identity. This results in what can be seen as the trauma of injustice. It includes racism, ableism, sexism, cissexism, heterosexism, classism, xenophobia, religious bigotry, and any other form of identity-based injustice. Many different forms of shock and developmental trauma can be a result of injustice, directly or indirectly. And perhaps especially important for cult survivors who have typically been isolated and in black and white thinking environments. When these forms of discrimination are internalized by individuals, they can be upheld by the culture without needing external reinforcement by the broader systems. Similarly, in cults, we internalize messages that leadership cultivates about us. The entire group then adopts this belief about us. And once out, we get to evaluate if we accept these messages or not. We get to parse through the tiny truth about our, quote, defects to see if the entire narrative that got created was in fact the whole truth. This can look like someone from a targeted group not feeling like they deserve the same treatment and rights that someone from a dominant group is afforded. And that's internalized oppression. Those individuals may not push back when treated unfairly, both because of what they have internalized and because of the potential consequences of pushing back. And there we've got the freeze, appease response often that maybe many cult survivors can relate to. At the same time, people whose identities are privileged by the dominant culture can take it to be normal or their birthright to receive certain benefits. And that there we have internalized dominance. And they may not even think to push back or challenge this assumption. The traumas of injustice include shock trauma such as identity-based violence, deportation, incarceration, and life-altering experience of discrimination or bias. At its core, the goal of trauma-informed culture is to foster individual and community healing and resilience by centering our shared humanity. The word resilience can refer to our capacity to overcome adversity or to rebound from difficulty. It can point to people's strength and capacity as well as their ingenuity and determination. We really are amazing as humans. We can and have overcome the unimaginable. Healing is not a linear process or a one-stop shop that builds a healing-centered culture. Our job is to create the conditions for change to happen and to recognize that this starts with us as individuals and as collectives doing the work together. Understanding trauma is just the start. Being trauma-informed or healing-centered can look different in different settings, yet all of us must cultivate critical thinking and embodied tools for reflection and accountability in order to create these conditions together. Our bodies hold our stories. They carry the power and grace we acquire throughout our life experiences, as well as the energy of trauma that is unresolved, unexpressed, and unmetabolized. As one of my somatic teachers, Hala Khoury, puts it, our bodies are our guidance system. It's like a GPS device. When properly calibrated, it gives us accurate information about the outside world and how to move through it. It can guide us to where we want to be and how we want to be. One of the main roles of our autonomic nervous system is to alert us to when there's danger, and we should retreat or fight, and when we're safe and we can settle. When we are overburdened with trauma or stress, our body's signals can become unreliable and erratic. We can get stuck in survival mode and defense. One word for this is dysregulation. This means that we are stuck in activation or shutdown, or we go back and forth from one extreme to the other. It's like having alarm bells constantly ringing inside us, or the opposite. We are shut down, numb, and feel nothing. When we were in our survival brain, our thinking and feeling is black and white. This can lead to conflict and poor communication. It's almost impossible to have nuance and see multiple sides to a situation when we're dysregulated, and it becomes very hard to relate to others and communicate effectively when we are constantly in this state. When we can settle ourselves, we can collaborate, be accountable, communicate skillfully, get creative, and be more effective in our work and lives together. In addition to connecting us to what is going on inside of us, somatic practices can help us manage the overwhelm that can come when we reconnect to our emotions. When we can feel settled in the face of intense emotions, both ours and those of other people, we are more likely to navigate the situation in a way that is better for everyone involved. Simple things like breathing, stretching, and checking in with ourselves can change a one-to-one interaction or even what's happening in a meeting. Understanding when we're triggered can allow us to take a moment to settle before we engage with someone. When we are settled, our communication will be more skillful. When everyone inside a community understands that we are all carrying something, we are better able to access curiosity and empathy for each other, and we can even find ways of being in the stress and chaos that don't have us turning on each other. Embodied practices build our capacity to be with discomfort without going into a trauma response. Trauma responses cause us to blame, shame, project, shut down, or lash out. They are never useful unless you're in an actual traumatic situation. This is especially important when doing work around social justice, because this work exposes us to traumatic situations and circumstances. These practices allow us to stay connected to each other amidst the chaos so we can be part of the solution. They can help us develop an embodied intelligence and capacity in a few ways. First, they foster introception, our ability to sense what's happening inside of us. And many of us move in our lives disconnected from our own sensations. This may be because of trauma, overwhelm, or just a culture that encourages distraction and disembodiment. But reconnecting to our emotions, impulses, and sensations allows us to be aware of what's going on for us. Only from this place of self-awareness can we take accountability for our actions and motivations. Without self-awareness, we're more likely to blame others and lash out or shame ourselves or lash in. Somatic practices can also help us get resources and stay grounded in the face of intense emotion and stress. This can allow us to be responsive rather than reactive, as well as flexible and adaptive in the face of stress, so that we can pivot when needed, stay open to new ideas, and be willing to be uncomfortable, which is typically required for certain growth to occur. Embodied practices to release stress and trauma are a vital part of healing, and we can bring them into our everyday lives and communities. This is ongoing work that will evolve and adapt as we change and grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was wonderful and really, I think, described how it starts with each of us, that journey of healing and recovery from extremist ideology and from polarized positions, at interpersonal level, at a societal level, and it really dovetails nicely, I think, with what we were saying about a more conversational piece. That's also about that wider healing and how that helps to, like I was saying about conflict situations, about the fact that it's only once people start to heal that they can start to love each other again in different ways, right?
Yeah, and I also thought it was so interesting, Rod, because I was thinking about how at one of the ICSA conferences, I recall during the kind of initial session, somebody who was hosting the conference just speaking to the community about kind of what to expect and how we might arrive at the conference with the kind of spirit of, oh, we're all the same, we're all survivors of cults, and I'm kind of home with my people. But then sometimes in a community where there is a lot of trauma and people are kind of in different spaces around that, that may come out, or people's reactions may flare up. And so also just, to some of my points there, really, I think when we're in an awareness around that, it's just so much easier to have compassion and some understanding.
I think that's absolutely right. And our dear colleague Lorna Goldberg spoke about the dialogue that's important at our conferences, respectful dialogue within a safe space that acknowledges that people are coming sometimes from quite different places, but that at the end of the day, we always have some common humanity, and that we're all in a journey of healing in different ways. So I think you've expressed it really well, and that's totally in line, I think, with the philosophy of ICSA and the type of context that we're striving to create. So thank you so much. And I know that you maybe can't stay for all of our time today, but thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
That's great. So we'll now pass to you, Kate. And thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Amber, and I am a survivor of coercive control as a child, as a teen, and as an adult. And one quick note before I start, I will be using the terms target or targeted victim in place of the term victim to reduce victim blaming and keep the responsibility for harm on the coercive controllers. As I said, I've been targeted by coercive control myself. My journey of uncovering coercive control led me to research the topic, obtain an advanced degree, and create a training model called the Quicksand Model. And ultimately, I founded End Coercive Control USA, where I train systems professionals using the Quicksand Model. The Quicksand Model combines images, alliterations, and the metaphor of quicksand to quickly train professionals on coercive control from the perspective of an entrapped target. It is trauma-informed and survivor-centered and always keeps accountability on the shoulders of the coercive controller. ICSA also provides consulting, assessment, and expert witness testimony in cases involving coercive control. In the last 4 years, I've worked with more than 100 targeted victims of coercive and controlling abuse. The vast majority of my clients already know that they are entrapped in the quicksand of coercive control by the time they find me. However, most of the professionals surrounding them do not. So ICSA's focus remains on prevention. And by prevention, I mean removing the causes. It is our contention that if professionals become knowledgeable and motivated to make systemic changes necessary to prevent coercive control, we can stop it from ever happening in the first place. In order to accomplish this lofty goal, we must identify the tactics and strategies of coercive control, understand the motivations, attitudes, and behaviors of the coercive controllers, protect the targeted victims, and remove the systemic causes of coercive control so that we can prevent them. So ICSA defines coercive control as the pattern of behavior that entraps targets in domination and oppression. We believe that coercive control can happen anywhere people are willing and able to abuse their power. Coercive control is not a single tactic or incident. It is a pattern of abusive tactics and strategies that over time robs targets of their dignity, safety, autonomy, and freedom. It may or may not include physical violence. Coercive control can destroy a targeted victim's very identity and the impacts, even when individually they are seemingly minor, are cumulative and so dehumanizing that they can be fatal. Coercive controllers are everywhere. Just like the coercive controllers pictured here, their abuse spans domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking, gangs, institutional violence, cults, serial killers, workplace bullying, politics, and even religion. All of these predators use coercive control, and the world is littered with the harmful impacts that remain within the brains and bodies of their targeted victims. In order to reduce coercive control, we must not only empower targeted victims to escape the quicksand and heal, but we must also remove all of the causes and stop coercive controllers in their tracks. So, what causes coercive control? Two main things cause coercive control: coercive controllers and the people and systems that enable them. Unfortunately, this is not well known or understood within our systems. As a matter of fact, as you can see from this image, the professionals working within our systems are often also entrapped in quicksand and drawn into abusing the targeted victims further. This is the real problem with coercive control, that once a targeted victim is entrapped in the quicksand, multiple unwitting parties and/or willing predators often join in the abuse and further entrap the targeted victim. Professionals, either knowingly or unknowingly, often end up colluding with the coercive controller, which causes the targets to be pulled deeper and deeper into the quicksand. These targets are silenced and forced to comply with unreasonable demands by not only their original coercive controller, but also by the professionals who enable their abuse to continue and even escalate. So how do coercive controllers manage to do this? Well, they target our normal psychological, social, and biological needs. And especially savvy coercive controllers target all three areas, hitting the bullseye. By targeting our normal human needs, coercive controllers gain control over our values, beliefs, emotions, and behaviors, and eventually over our very identity. Coercive controllers also exploit hierarchies which are built on supremacy and misogyny. These systems already exploit and punish those at the bottom to keep those at the top in power. So it's difficult for targeted victims to explain what is even happening to them because these systems, built on abusing power, keep the coercive controllers' tactics invisible. All forms of supremacy and oppression, including racism, sexism, ableism, and all other isms, not only cause coercive control, but enable it to escalate. Ideologies or belief systems also open the door to coercive controllers. Like colored glasses, our beliefs color our perceptions and allow coercive control to sneak past our critical thinking, making us easier to manipulate and control. Coercive controllers create a mirage that combines manipulative kindness, also known as love bombing, mirroring, and future faking to override the target's critical thinking and hide the dangerous quicksand and its warning signs of coercive control in the background. The mirage fools targets and outsiders to believe that coercive controllers have good intentions when they do not. Coercive controllers always have a hidden agenda to dominate and oppress. So even when they seem kind, loving, and genuinely helpful, it's all a smokescreen. It is all a mirage. Let's take a quick look at how coercive controllers use the D's, E's, and F's to entrap and exploit their targets so that we can learn ways to communicate with them with ways that will help them heal from coercive control's aftermath. The D's represent the weapons of coercive control, also known as the doubles and Darvo. Although all these weapons are harmful, 3 are particularly damaging, not just to direct targets, but also to their families and communities. Double speak, double team, and double binds, which I will cover in a moment. Because the Ds are often so subtle, they can be extremely difficult to identify, not just by the direct targets, but also by those attempting to assist them to escape. The Fs are the methods of coercive control: force, fraud, and fear. While physical violence can be used within a pattern of coercive control, it is only the tip of the iceberg. There is always a lot more hiding below force on the surface of the quicksand. If we want to help targets escape and heal from coercive control, we must learn to identify the tactics of fear and fraud as well. And we must be able to effectively communicate these harms and connect with targets so that we can validate the target's experiences and assist them to understand that they are not the one to blame for what has happened to them. While there may be things targets can do to prevent being targeted in the future, only the coercive controller and their enablers are to blame. When combined, the coercive controller's Ds and Fs achieve their goals, the Es. Coercive control is purposeful, instrumental, and intentional. We know this because the coercive controllers have goals to ensnare, entrap, exploit, enslave, and prevent their target's escape with escalation, all while being very careful to evade accountability. Understanding the intentional nature of coercive control is critical to helping targets escape the quicksand and heal from the aftermath. So let's look at those three doubles to see how coercive controllers meet their goals. Double speak weaponizes communication. Coercive controllers use all manner of manipulative and deceptive communication to confuse, frustrate, punish, and provoke their targets. In order to assist targets to escape, we must make it clear to them that it was no accident that the coercive controller used communication as a weapon. These psychological manipulations, especially gaslighting, where the coercive controller sadistically drives their target crazy, can do an extraordinary amount of damage over time, including severe harms like PTSD, CPTSD, dissociation, identity disturbances, and even death. And if we want to assist targets escape and healing, we must repeatedly and consistently remind them that they are not at fault. They have been deceived in highly sophisticated ways, which prevented true consent. Double team weaponizes social support. Coercive controllers fracture relationships, isolate targets from support, and turn people against one another. They prevent targets from accessing medical and mental health care. They interfere with access to their children. They ruin relationships, and they interfere with their targets' income, career, education, etc. Again, there is nothing accidental about these tactics or the harm that they cause. Additionally, double binds weaponize a target's agency and choice. Coercive controllers set their targets up, forcing them into choices with only bad outcomes. Targets are forced to choose between things like obtaining a protective order, which could escalate the coercive controller, or not doing so and facing constant stalking. Or they must choose between living with an abuser or divorcing them under a credible threat of losing custody of their children. These decisions can cause extreme emotional, psychological, and even physical harm to the targets, who are often blamed for the very harm done to them. The antidote? Giving targeted victims all the information they need to understand at a cellular level that they are not to blame. They did not consent, and they are not complicit. Because unless and until they can fully grasp that truth, they will likely be unable to face the pain of what they have lived through effectively enough to recover from what was stolen from them. It is absolutely critical for professionals working with targeted survivors of coercive control to be conscious of the magnitude of strategic tactics that are used to manipulate systems built on coercion and control to their benefit. Because as professionals become complicit in harming targeted victims, the target's trauma increases exponentially. However, if they can learn the coercive controller's weapons, the Ds, their methods, the Fs, and their goals, the Es, they can avoid being used by coercive controllers to cause additional harm. Finally, with coercive control, context is king. Coercive controllers will try to fool you by removing context. This image illustrates the same action with two very different contexts. When the man slaps the woman, he does so to punish her for not tidying up the kitchen. Conversely, she slaps him to escape his punishment and protect the baby. Context matters. Why? Because a slap to dominate is very different from a defensive one. Coercive controllers exclude context to flip the script and to play the victim. So it's important to ask questions and understand the entire context to avoid being tricked by a coercive controller posing as a victim. And it's also important to compassionately support victims who have acted aggressively to defend themselves or others. Acts of self-defense do not qualify as coercive control. Self-defense is an act of resistance and should be applauded and not punished. ICSA is committed to training individuals, groups, and systems on the tactics and strategies used by coercive controllers to dominate and control their targeted victims. We train professionals to treat targets with dignity and respect, remove victim-blaming narratives, and shift their focus off damage control and onto prevention so that coercive control never takes hold in the first place. Because helping targets escape is not enough. Helping them heal is not enough. We must remove the causes. We must dismantle systems that are rooted in supremacy, misogyny, and oppression, and replace them with systems valuing equality, safety, dignity, and freedom. Because it will always be easier to break a person than to put them back together. Learning to communicate with those entrapped in ways that emboldens their escape is super important and the focus of our presentation today. However, at ICSA, we are committed to ensuring that prevention efforts are central to our work, supporting clients through painful custody battles with coercive controllers is an honor and a privilege for me, and one important way to heal the aftermath of coercive control. However, my real goal is to work myself out of that career. I hope to ensure that all people's dignity, liberty, safety, and freedom are prioritized to such a degree that coercive control and coercive controllers cease to exist. Here's my information should you be interested in getting in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you so much both for your amazing presentation, wonderful visuals of the model, which has already been shown to be really efficacious, and also I think the power and the importance of psychoeducation as part of that healing process that you were talking about, that Jennifer was talking about as well. And the importance of prevention, right, in terms of thinking about the kind of intergenerational aspects of oppression and how this causes so much coercive control, so much radicalization and polarization. So I completely applaud that vision of the day when we can look back on this time and say that we were able together to move beyond it. So I'm really grateful for all that you do, and thank you for being with us for this panel.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thanks.
You're very welcome. And we're out of the allotted time, so we don't have time, sadly, for further discussion. But these are our email addresses. Kate also had her details up just now at the end of her presentation too. So please do get in touch. We're happy to continue the dialogue, because dialogue in a respectful, learning way, in a healing way, preventative way, is exactly what this has been all about. So we hope we can carry on that dialogue with you all that are listening or watching our recording. So thank you all for doing so, and take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.